This project is created by Connor Wool as part of the requirements of English 4 at Guthrie Virtual School. And it's entitled Macbeth after the famous play by William Shakespeare. So the play starts and we see three witches huddled around a boiling cauldron, and they're like saying some creepy stuff and throwing some animal parts into it. And so, yeah, really ominous setting. And so after that, we cut to this guy named King Duncan, and he hears that his two men, Malcolm and Banquo, have defeated two armies. One from Ireland, led by MacDonald, and one from Norway, led by, just some other random guy. I guess he wasn't important enough to be named. And so after that, Macbeth and Banquo are, coming back from their battle, and they go across a moor, which is some weird English term for like open land, and they encounter the three witches that we discussed. And so the three witches see them. Banquo and Macbeth are kind of weirded out, and the witches like offer to tell them a prophecy, basically saying like, "All right, we have some information for you, but it's going to be pretty creepy and weird. You want to hear it?" And so Macbeth and Banquo are like, "Maybe that's kind of weird. Seems like a bad idea, but I'll hear about it." So basically, like they hand him the prophecies, and Macbeth is told that he will become Thane of Glamis, he will become Thane of Cawdor, and eventually he'll become King of Scotland. So basically, like he'll eventually take over King Duncan. King Duncan was this cool nobleman, but eventually he'll be replaced by Macbeth. And then as for Banquo, they kind of left him out in the cold, but they basically say that he'll have royalty in his family line, like some people in his family will be royalty, but he himself won't be. So Banquo's kind of bummed, but you know. And so after that, Macbeth and Banquo are kind of skeptical. So they go back to England. And as it turns out, Macbeth actually has part of his prophecy come true. Like two guys come up to him and they basically tell him that he became Thane of Cawdor. So he didn't even have to try for it. It became true. And so Macbeth's like, maybe the witches are right. Maybe, this will work out. So after that, like King Duncan, because obviously Banquo and Macbeth, they took out those armies, he's pretty happy. And so King Duncan's like, hey, you want to go to dinner with me, Macbeth? And Macbeth's like, yeah, sure. How about 10 o'clock at my place? And, King Duncan's like, all right, cool. So let's meet there. So before he goes to dinner, Macbeth, like, sends a letter to Lady Macbeth basically saying, like, yo, I just got promoted to be, like, Thane of Cawdor. King Duncan invited me to dinner. Like, these three creepy witches prophesied I'll be king of Scotland. It'll be super cool. So he's like, all right, meet me at the dinner. So Lady Macbeth meets him at the dinner. And Lady Macbeth, she's like really, into the prophecy and she wants King or Macbeth to be king. And so she's like, I basically know how to speed run all this. And so she's like, all right, we're going to get the Chamberlains drunk. We're going to kill Duncan. We're going to blame it on the Chamberlains because they're not going to know what's going to happen. And then, boom, we can just blame everyone. End of story. So naturally, like Macbeth's like, well, that sounds really morally wrong and messed up. Why would we want to do that? He's like, I don't want to do that at all. But as it turns out, Lady Macbeth's like pretty persistent and she's like really bothering Macbeth. She's really annoying about it. And so eventually Macbeth kind of caves and he's like, all right, I'll do it, I guess. And so poor King Duncan's like sleeping in his room. The Chamberlains are asleep outside. They don't know what's going on. And so Macbeth like slips into Duncan's room. He's got a knife and he's about to stab him. But before he does, he like has these crazy visions. Like he sees daggers. He sees like an axe going into Duncan's brow, like all this crazy stuff. And so when he sees this, you know, most normal people would be deterred, but he's like, nah, it's probably nothing. I'm not going crazy. Let's get on with it. And so he proceeds to stab Duncan and kill him really violently and loudly. Then he's like, all right, now that I dispatched of him, let's just carry out the plan. I'll manipulate everybody and say that the Chamberlains killed him. So the Chamberlains wake up. They have no earthly idea what happened. And then Macbeth basically is like, all right, well, I'll get rid of them. And so he executes the Chamberlains and assumes kingship. Then after that, King Duncan's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, are like, well, our dad just died, so we should probably get out of here because I'm not trying to be a victim. And so they're like, all right, let's head to England. Let's get away from Macbeth and all these crazy people. So they go to England. Then after that, Macbeth is now king and he's kind of chilling. And so he's like, all right, I wonder who can take over my throne. And then he thinks back. He's like, oh, yeah, Banquo could probably do that because the prophecy said that his kids could be royalty. So basically, Macbeth's like, I know how to solve that. So, doing what any moral person would do, he hires a group of murderers to kill Banquo and his son Fleance. So basically, like, the murderers ambush Banquo and Fleance, and for some reason they only jump Banquo at first. Like, so I guess they're too busy stabbing Banquo. Rest in peace, Banquo, by the way. And so while they're busy stabbing Banquo, Fleance kind of dips out of there. He leaves and he runs off into the night. So the murderers ultimately failed. And they go back and they tell Macbeth, they're like, yo, we failed. I'm so sorry. And then Macbeth's really bummed because, he couldn't cheat the prophecy. But ultimately, he's like, oh, well, at least there's still the party. I'll just go over there, relax. Nothing will go wrong. All right. So Macbeth's just chilling at the party, and guess who shows up? Banquo's ghost. So, Macbeth is sitting there, and then all of a sudden he sees Banquo's ghost staring at him, and he gets really freaked out. He like makes a crazy scene. Then Lady Macbeth tries to like control the whole thing, but after that, the lords are all like gathered around looking at him, basically saying like he's so weird, and so he loses a little credit there. So after that, Macbeth is like super bummed about it, and so he's like, all right, that's it. I'm gonna go to the witches, get to the bottom of this. And so basically, he's like, why did I see Banquo's ghost? And then the witches are like, don't worry about that. We have some real info for you. Here, some demons will tell you some new prophecies. And so Macbeth, of course, he's like, that's kind of weird and creepy, but I'll hear about it. So the demons basically tell him he should beware of this character named Macduff. Macduff is like, he used to work under King Duncan, but he doesn't really like Macbeth. Like, he doesn't support Macbeth's kingship. So they tell him to beware of him. And then the second prophecy is that no one born of woman could kill Macbeth. And the third is that there's basically nothing to worry about until this place called Burnham Woods comes to life and attacks him. So basically, unless trees grow legs, he's safe. So naturally, after Macbeth hears this, he gets like this real big ego, and he's like, well, that's great. I guess I can't be killed by any man born a woman, which is literally anyone. And I don't think trees will run at me anytime soon. So after that, he just goes back to Scotland. Meanwhile, Macduff, the guy he has to worry about, is like, well, this Macbeth guy's unstable. I should probably leave. You know what? I'm going to go help Malcolm because Malcolm and Donalbain left to England. And so after that, Macbeth hears that, Macduff, his new rival that he has to worry about, left to go to England with Malcolm. And so he's like, you know what? That's an act of treason. Can't have that. And doing what any sane person would do, he has his family executed. So naturally, when Macduff hears about this, he's super torn up and he's full of revenge in his heart and he really wants to get back at Macbeth. So he makes it his sole mission to kill Macbeth. And so he goes over to Malcolm and he's like, all right, I can get a 2-for-1. I can get Malcolm king. And when we invade, we can kill Macbeth. So they join forces and they plan to meet outside of Macbeth's castle, basically. So cut back and we're with Lady Macbeth. And since Lady Macbeth started this whole thing, she feels real bad about it. She starts getting this rare disease called guilt. And then it actually gets so bad that, she kills herself because she caused this whole thing. It's rather tragic. And so after this, Macbeth hears about it, and he's like, oh man, this is really sad. But of course, he still has to prepare for Macduff. So, he's getting his castle ready and everything. And so he's like, all right, well, now my main goal is just to focus on the prophecy and hope that it doesn't come true. And unfortunately for him, part of it does come true. So like when Malcolm and them show up, for some reason they like decide it would be a great idea to cut off branches of trees, like grab them in their arms and start sprinting towards the castle. I guess it's like an advanced tactic. And so naturally, like when Macbeth sees this, he's pretty taken aback. But he's like, oh well, at least only half the prophecy's true. But if they want to fight, let's fight, and I can't die, so get me in there. And so Macbeth like goes on the battlefield. He starts killing people. And then like the first victim he comes across is a man is a kid rather named young Syward, and he's basically the son of the general of the English forces, and he's a 15-year-old kid who really wants to prove that he's like a man. So this really shows like when Macbeth's ego takes over, because like he sees this little kid and he thinks he's immortal, so he starts talking down to him like, I can't be killed. And then, Syward rushes towards him, and needless to say, he makes quick work of him. So rip Syward. And then after that, Macbeth continues on the battle. His army's doing all right, but he really starts getting taken over. And then he runs into the infamous Macduff. Macduff's wanted revenge for so long, and Macbeth really wants to stop the prophecy from happening. So he's like, all right, I'll kill Macbeth, I'll kill Macduff, and it'll all be over. And so Macduff sees Macbeth, and he's like, I'll get my revenge, you swine. And then they kind of run at each other. They have like this epic battle, and just imagine like some super cool music in the back and everything. And so Macbeth feels pretty good. He's like, all right, I'm not going to die. But then Macduff hits him with a real curveball. Because if you remember back to the prophecy, they said he can't be killed of a man born of woman. But then Macduff is basically like, technically, my mom had a C-section, so yeah, you're doomed. And then Macbeth is like, oh, well, guess it's over for me. So Macbeth fights a little bit. He's fighting Macduff, It goes all right, but then Macduff ultimately beheads Macbeth, and he gets his revenge. So after that, Macbeth's dead, order's restored. They still have to honor young Syward, but ultimately they, move on because they know Malcolm will live on in King Duncan's image. So then Malcolm presides over the lands once again. Macduff has his revenge. Macbeth's dead. Banquo's dead, rest in peace. But ultimately, it works out for the best, and everyone's happy. And if it's a too long not read version, here you go. So, I hope you enjoy.